most technical of the 3 lifts. So I'm gonna draw a little diagram and throw a lot of stuff at you, and then we're just gonna go back to it as a reference as I show you the movements. So if a lot of this doesn't make sense immediately, it probably won't, that's okay. You just wanna get like the holistic view started first so that we can then start to dissect it, okay? So. See ya.
Oh my God. So good. Chocolate or no chocolate?
Okay. So here we've got like a basic arc. You can think of this like a bridge, or an arc over a doorway. So where is this arc going to be the strongest?
Top.
Yep, right there. Because there's pressure that's pushing. Let's say that these are made of blocks of stone. Okay? There's pressure from these stones that are all pushing and meeting and balancing out right here at the top. So all the pressure is right here. There's pressure going this way and up and this way and up. This is essentially the position that we're trying to create when we bench press. Okay? Does anybody have any idea what this foothold is right here in terms of bench press? What is this?
Blades?
Shoulder blades. Head, shoulder. How about that one?
Feet, butt, or your feet. Depends on where.
Which one is it?
Your hips.
There's only one other position, so which one is it?
Your hips.
Feet.
Feet.
What's missing from this then?
Hips.
Hips. So, when we create this arc, and we want this to be the strongest point of that arc, notably what's missing are the hips. Okay? Imagine that this is here as like a fail-safe in case this bridge collapses. In case one of these fail, imagine that this column here is going to support the load. Okay? This is our basic bench setup. If it doesn't all make sense, it probably doesn't. Let's get into the setup and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Okay? All right, so on the bench press, our goal is to create the strongest arc that we can, because we're going to have an object coming down onto the top of that arc, and we don't want it to deform the arc, we want it to stay strong and taut. So we're going to have to create pressure from 2 sides, pushing up into an arc. As we just discussed, those 2 sides are the feet and the head and shoulders. So to get set up, I'm going to set my grip. We'll talk about the best grip width in a moment. I'm going to set my grip, and I'm going to come up on my shoulders, like I'm doing a yoga inversion. Like 1 foot at a time. Bring them down, my butt is still in the air. And then I'm going to wiggle my feet back until my butt is touching the bench, but not supporting my body. Okay? This top of my arc is now very strong versus this. Okay? It's an active position. It should be a lot of work to get into that position and maintain it, because we want to make a bridge. Okay? If we got lazy in here and skipped a couple stones or didn't apply enough pressure, then this whole thing would just fall in on itself. And luckily you've got the butt there, the hips, to catch you, but that's not really what the thing was designed to do.
So you said feet back until the butt is touching but not supporting.
Exactly. So what I'll often do with people who are just starting out on like this type of competition style bench is I'll have them bench press with their butt up. Sometimes it's easier for somebody to understand if you magnify a dysfunction so they understand what not to do. If you tell somebody, okay, I want your butt to be touching this thing, but I don't want any of your weight on it. That's a very foreign concept for a lot of people. Versus, if you can have them do the bench press with light weight, with no butt, now they're going to understand, oh, 2 points of contact. And then eventually, you can get them to bring their butt down. Now in powerlifting, we do a paused bench. Not touch and go. 1, 2, and then up. Let's talk about grip width for a moment. So the ideal grip width, usually, is going to be the one where when that bar is down on your chest, your forearms are perpendicular to the ground. Certain things could change this, but generally speaking, that's going to be the most effective grip. A lot of people, especially guys, will have a very narrow grip, something like this, and they'll bench just flat with their elbows flared, which just makes my stomach hurt when I see it. Okay? So instead, we want to focus on bringing that bar further down to the top of this arc, right? The arc is not back here towards the head. It's here in the middle. So that bar path is not staying high here. It's coming down to the top of the arc. The highest point of my chest is where that bar comes. And then I'm pushing it up and slightly back. Okay, so let's talk about bar path for a moment. The bar path on bench press is not straight. It starts off straight, but then it has to go back a little bit. And here's why. Remember on back squat, we spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to find our lats. We find our lats by externally rotating, shoulders down, shoulders back. Our lats do this, and this is the motion that they do. If we're not coming down, then we're not using our lats. This is what they do. If I'm here, I'm not doing this. So the downward portion of the bench is essentially like a row. So a lot of the times what I'll have people do is use a lat pull-down machine. Because they're going to automatically come down with their arms at about 45 degrees. Nobody's doing lat pull-down like this. And yet so many people want to bench like this. You can easily find your lats when you have something that you're pulling against. It becomes harder when it's pushing. But you need to find a way to get them involved. And we do that by bringing the bar a bit further down on the chest than most people are familiar with. It then stands to reason if we brought it all the way down here, we need to get it back up to where it started from, and we want to use this range of motion. So it's not straight up, because then the bar is going to get jumped forward. It's up and slightly back. So it starts off going straight, but then we finish, and we engage our triceps by punching it out, up and back. Do you have a question?
No.
Okay.
So what would be a good, I mean, other than, using your lats kind of pulling down, is there like a specific point on the body that we can tell people to sort of aim for, like the diaphragm? Is it like?
It's different for everybody based on the length of your appendages. However, for most people, when your arms are both perpendicular to the ground at the bottom and at about a 45-degree angle from your body, that's generally speaking going to be the right place. If you see somebody chicken winging it, almost certainly they're not doing it right. Some people are going to have it go lower, some people will have it higher, but nobody should have it like right below the collarbone. That's going to be universally too high. Nobody should really have it down by their belly button either. That's kind of universally too low. A lot of people don't wear a belt because the bar is not allowed to touch the belt in competition. So that should give you a bit of an understanding about how low some people are going down onto their belly. If they're worried about hitting their belt with the bar, that should tell you it's definitely not all the way up here, it's down here. So if you can figure out how to find your lats on that eccentric loading phase on the way down, you're gonna be storing all that power. And even with a pause, you're like a jack-in-the-box, ready to spring it back up. But if you just let gravity bring the bar down, you're not loading anything. You're not storing any of that energy. All that potential energy that you had from this object with a given mass being held this distance above the earth is now gone. You've given it back to gravity for free. Load it, load it, load it, load it, hold it, and then spring it back up. You can only do that if you get your lats involved. Finding your lats becomes more challenging on here than on the squat because you're laying down in a different plane than you're used to being in most of your waking hours. Most of us are upright most of the day. We're not usually awake laying down. So shoulders back becomes shoulders down. Shoulders down becomes shoulders forward. Does that make sense? So you need to think about this pressure pushing up. It's equal and opposite. Your legs are pushing this way. Your shoulders are pushing this way. Actively the entire time. That's why this setup looks so crazy. Because I want to get up enough shoulder pressure to really have a good solid grip on that arc. Then of course your big breath. And then up. Now, if you can do all of that, you can maintain that lat pressure, you can spring it off your chest. The big secret about the powerlifting bench press is leg drive. Okay? You can essentially turn this bench press into a push press, but a horizontal push press. You can only do that from your feet. And this is why there are no hips involved. Apart from it, getting in the way of us creating the strongest arc possible, if you create an impulse down in your feet that travels up through you, bottom like this, you're now using a lot of extra musculature and power to move this thing than everybody else who's just using their arms. So I'll have people exaggerate it, much like we would do for somebody new to push press, right? You may say in the beginning, jump as high as you can, as hard as you can, to get that bar moving. So they understand, okay, strict press versus hip assisted press. Got it. As they get more experience, obviously it's just a shallow dip in the knees but explosive up. But in the beginning, even with their butt up, I want you to hip thrust it up. Okay? If you're using your legs and your hips to assist you like a push press, obviously you guys know the difference between a strict press and a push press. There's a big difference. You're gonna lift a lot more weight this way. The other reason that the bar path has to be up and back is that you need to be pushing with your feet up and back. If you just do a hip thrust straight up, almost certainly you're gonna lose that bar forward. And that's where most people do end up losing the bench. They'll end up losing it forward. If it starts to drift forward like that, you've lost it. That's always what happens. So you gotta keep the elbows in front of the bar and then straight. Questions?
Is there such thing as too much arc? Can you overarch your back?
Not really. So, particularly with women in the sport or extra mobile, you'll see some really ridiculous stuff, man.
They move the bar 1 inch.
1 inch, 2 inches, like the arc is so big that like this is their range of motion. Honestly, I mean it's a point of contention. It's kind of crazy, but there's nothing that I'm aware of from a safety perspective that makes an excessive arc dangerous. Because again, we're creating a physical structure. Right? A load is coming down from the top. This makes sense. If you were to build a structure that was strong, you would want it to have a nice big arc. Now, would you want it to be like a bridge to be like that? Not really for practical purposes, but you know what? It would still be really strong. And nobody's really bending like that anyway. So I mean, there are limits. I would say like this is probably the biggest arc you would see a normal human being able to express. So lots of moving parts on bench press. As with the squat, you need to focus on the setup before you can get to all the other good stuff. Because if you try to push through your legs and turn it into a push press, but you don't have your shoulders firmly planted, then all you're gonna do is push yourself back on the bench. You're not gonna get the power up into the implement. You're just gonna be moving yourself. And same thing if you have all your weight resting on your butt. If you go to push through your legs, you go to load your lats on the way down, it's just not gonna happen because this arc is not being supported. There's gonna be a deformation of your chest, of your belly, of your arc. So some of that eccentric power, instead of staying up here, is gonna start to get absorbed. And you're not gonna be able to recycle it. Make sense? Questions? Anybody wanna try?
Dumbbell bench versus barbell bench
Good question.
for strength training.
So, barbell bench is really, really, really bad for your shoulders. Because we're being asked to maintain this pronated grip, the bar doesn't bend, so you're always wanting to be internally rotated just by default. This feels more natural, especially in a world where people are doing this and this all the time. So, apart from it being more effective when you find your lats, it's also a lot safer for your shoulder, but it's active work. Like you have to really focus on keeping yourself in an externally rotated lat supported position in order to do the bench press safely. The dumbbell bench is a lot easier to maintain a nice, neutral, comfortable 45-degree position because they're not forcing you to be inwardly rotated. I'm a huge fan of dumbbell bench for general strength. I think it translates really, really well to barbell bench in a basic strength capacity. As though we're learning, there's a lot of technicality here. So you can have all the strength in the world, but if you don't know how to apply it against the implement, then it's not going to be useful. So I'll have my athletes generally do a lot of dumbbell bench for the first 12 to 16 weeks of a cycle. Then for the last 4 to 8 weeks before a contest, we'll switch over to doing a lot more barbell bench, just to translate over all that strength into something that's actually usable as a technique. And so, does that answer your question?
Mm-hmm.
So that's might be a good time to talk about like basic programming for powerlifting, for like a contest versus maybe what we would do here as like, you know, a group program. So generally 3 phases. There's going to be an accumulation or a volume phase where you're doing lots of reps, not like CrossFit level reps, but you know, 8 to 12, trying to put on muscle generally. And then there's going to be a strengthening phase, and each of these we can just say is going to be, you know, 8 weeks. A strengthening phase where the rep range now goes down like maybe 4 to 6 reps, and then the last phase is the peaking phase where we're going to go down to sets of 1 to 2, but the weights are going to be a lot heavier. Throughout these, the variance is going down from phase to phase, the volume is going down from phase to phase, and also the intensity is going up from phase to phase. So we're getting more specific and heavier as we get closer to a contest, because not just physically, but psychologically as well, you need to start to train your brain to do the thing again with loads that are very uncomfortable. So a peaking phase generally is going to have, I don't know, like I would write a peak for somebody, maybe their squat day would be 5 sets of 1 at 89%, and then 3 sets of 2 at maybe 85%. So I'm not a really big fan of anybody failing reps in training, ever, because I don't want somebody to go onto the platform and think that they might fail. If you never fail, then you're not even thinking it's an option, so you're just gonna keep fighting. That's just a little aside. But, you know, the reps are meant to be heavy enough to be a bit uncomfortable, to be a little scary, but still doable. To remind you how to move and how to do this very technical thing with loads that make you uncomfortable, loads that are gonna make you wanna slow down. So, I'll also, in the first volume phase, include a lot more accessories, a lot of weird stuff. I may have somebody front squat just for the sake of front squatting to get those quads a little bit bigger and stronger in that first volume and accumulation phase. I'm probably not gonna have somebody front squatting as we move into that strengthening phase.
Deload week,
Deload week,
leading up to the meet or no?
so yes, but not a full deload. I wanna keep you sharp and keep you remember how to do the movement. So if the contest is on a Saturday, then I'll generally have people do openers for squat and bench on the Monday. And then on the Wednesday, I'll have them do like 50% for 3 sets of 3. It's nice, light, easy. And then depending on the athlete, I may have them do one more day. So somebody who's lifting a lot of weight, big guys, 500-600 pounds, extra rest is good. Okay, like we're probably not even gonna do openers on that Monday, probably the previous Friday for more rest. Most females and like the smaller guys, you don't need that much time to recover from say like a 200-pound squat, even if it is still 100% or like your max. Like there's an absolute nature to the loads, right? Like squatting 1,000 for one is not the same as 500 for 2. Me squatting 85% is not the same as Delaney squatting 85%. We may experience it in a very similar way, but our body's gonna react to it a lot more differently. Delaney is gonna recover from that squat a lot more quickly. So I'll have somebody that's smaller, lifting less weight, train a little bit closer to the contest, maybe up until even Thursday, just light loads, just keeping everything fresh, keeping it from getting too tight. Now deadlift, the best thing you can do to deadlift a lot is not deadlift. I mean, it's actually crazy. I've hit PRs after not deadlifting for like 3 weeks. For big guys, I'm gonna have them not deadlift for at least 2 weeks before a contest. Again, smaller athletes, I'll have them deadlift up to like the Friday before the next Saturday meet. So like still about a week. Yes.
Just via like CNS rest? Is that?
CNS rest, adrenal system rest. So here's the thing. Bench and squat are basically with gravity's help trying to kill you, right? And so there's like a built-in incentive for you to like not die. You're gonna automatically fight. This one, I don't think I wanna do this anymore. You can just let go. There's no price of failure really. I mean, yeah, you wanna win the contest, you wanna do your best, but unless you really, really, really wanna be deadlifting, you're not gonna deadlift at your potential. It has to be the only thing in your world that you care about. It's picking something really heavy up off the ground because it's so easy to just walk away. Just put it back on the ground, whatever. Didn't want to do that. So extra rest not only for your body and your CNS to recover, yes, but also for your brain to recover enough in a psychological sense for you to really want to deadlift. You shouldn't miss deadlifting. So that's why I save all of my stimulants and all of my weird stuff until deadlift. If you want to deadlift, especially conventional, you're gonna have a good deadlift day. But if you don't want to deadlift, either because it's not your strongest lift, or because the last time you did it didn't go well, or because you're still fatigued, or whatever, oh boy, you better have a lot of caffeine or something to try to change that attitude because you're just gonna be like, nope, and then just let go. So a long time resting to recover to be able to deadlift is always a good thing, CNS-wise, psychologically, and physically. Make sense? Any other questions? Anybody else want a bench? Okay.
Try the feet. I just rest my butt, so I've never tried it.
Is it too high?
Too high.
There's
To what?
I think I'm adjusting.
This one?
Do you have a question?
If you're smaller, you may need to use blocks for your feet as well in order to be able to get up into that correct position. They do offer blocks at meets for people for this exact.
Wait, you started here.
I start up there. Take this thing off that you're wearing. This slippy. So, like we know now that these shoulders have to be firmly planted and pushing that way. Way more up than that. Get aggressive with it, like like that.
I can't reach the ground like that.
Well, so you might need the blocks.
I don't think I can like.
Is it still too high? Might be. Yep.
They're not.
Yes, they're not. My butt's not touching.
Wait, do it one more time so I can see. So that looks like the right grip width. It looks like it's coming out right on top of the bar. And your butt's not touching for now. Again, that's fine. For now. For now. Like once you get used to using your legs, I would say once I have somebody successfully use leg drive and feel like that push press effect, that's when I start talking to them about getting their butt to settle. Because once they do that, they've now demonstrated they have a pretty good understanding of how to get the lats involved, about the role that the legs play. And also they're on the cusp of lifting a lot more weight. If you figured out leg drive, your bench is about to go nuclear. So let's start to get it a little tighter and a little bit more control. So not only do we have to keep our butt down from a rules perspective in USAPL, but also you do want that reference point to make sure that nothing else is moving. It is an element of stability. We don't want movement through our vertebrae as we're going through this motion. So having that additional grounding point does help. Again, all of our work here is to make sure that doesn't happen, but having that extra point of contact is just like, again, the safety net to make sure that we're not moving and shearing our vertebrae as we're trying to press against them. You wanna try it again?
You want some plates?
Yeah, you wanna try it with blocks for your feet?
Sure.
Is there anything about like width of feet? Like,
Great question, I'll get to that in just a
okay.
second.
For those of us with longer legs.
Yeah, let's do 45.
So because it's not bringing my plates. Maybe like back.
It's a bigger arc.
Forgot to breathe. Ah!
It's work, right?
That is harder.
It's a lot of work just to get into the position. Now, as far as where your feet go and your legs, generally if you have longer legs, yeah, you're gonna wanna wiggle out wider. Like that's what I do. In USAPL, we're forced to keep our heels down. So if you have
That's the
long,
rule?
what's that?
That's the rule?
That's the rule.
Interesting.
Your
The whole
feet
time?
cannot move. Let me show you this. Your feet cannot move at all. Yeah, and I don't know how much you guys care to know about the rules specifically of powerlifting, but in the squat, for example, there are two commands, squat and rack. So you unrack it, walk it out, you get a squat command, do the thing, and then you have to wait, and there's a rack command, and you put it back in. If your foot moves at all after the squat command, no lift. If you go down and up, no lift. If you put it back in the rack before the rack command, no lift.
What if your foot like moves before the rack command, like not a forward motion, but like your heel slides out?
No lift.
No lift.
Yeah. So your foot can move like this, in place, only. If it moves even a little bit out of its position, no lift. On bench, there are three commands. Start, that means it can come down. Then you wait, press, weight, and then rack. But back to the feet. So I have kind of long legs. And so when this is really low. So when I set up, I'm gonna wiggle out until I'm settled. But if you're benching with your heels up, like a lot of people do, then you can stay narrower, and you can still build a good amount of pressure that way. If you're ever gonna compete in USAPL, you're gonna have to unlearn that, and it's not fun. I would say, unless you feel very, very strongly about keeping your heels up for some reason, keep your heels down. It's gonna be a little bit more stable, a little bit more predictable, and you never know, you may decide to compete one day, and then you won't have to break that habit.
What about for someone that feels like that arc position puts too much pressure on their back?
So, if somebody has a structural issue with their back, then they have to do whatever they need to or whatever they can to not have pain. But I would say a lot of people that I've encountered have had a back issue in the past, and so they're apprehensive about doing particular things just on principle alone. And if we're creating this arc position and it doesn't hurt, this is the strongest position for your back. If you have an object that's coming down and trying to push against it. As long as you're not moving while you're doing it, this is going to be strongest for your back. Now, if this hurts because you've got a pre-existing condition and you cannot get into this position, that's an outlier. It's different. Obviously, listen to your body, don't do something that hurts. Use as many of these principles as you can in order to, again, protect your back. Because even if getting into the best quote-unquote position for your back hurts, well, if you can get into it partially, at least, like instead of getting up like this, like if I can at least really ground my legs and push my chest up a little bit, enough to really get my lats involved, this is going to be a lot better than just like completely flat back, loose benching. And certainly better than this.
Bench like that?
I put my feet on the bench.
Oh, on the bench, but I
Yeah.
meant just like up.
I ground my heels on the bench.
Let's try the floor.
I know.
Yeah.
The floor is more stable.
Imagine that. On the big place.
Well, in all seriousness, as somebody with a bad back,
Yeah.
stability is your friend.
Yeah.
So getting into the most rigid, tight, unmoving position that you can without pain, and then going through the range of motion is going to be much better.
Do you make the powerlifters do push-ups?
Do their thighs touch first?
Not really. I make people do clapping push-ups to work on speed, and a lot of dips. Dips translate a lot better to bench than push-ups, and they're easier on your shoulders because of the neutral grip. I don't think that's good enough because you seem very comfortable.
Right. Damn it. Okay. So, grip.
So get up on your shoulders, get
Bring your butt
up,
off, Jen.
and really wiggle your shoulders underneath you.
It's looking.
And wearing like a slippery sweater doesn't really help the cause, but
Right. It's a
and
lot
then
of
one foot
tension.
at a time. So find support in your legs, and let's keep your butt up for now, so you can really feel and understand what it's like to have just legs and shoulders. So push your legs this way, push your shoulders this way.
It's crazy how hard.
That's hard.
Breath.
But I want to rematch my bench neck. Let's do it again.
Again.
I wish we had done this before we did it.
Straighten out your wrists. So now try one that's like the push press version.
Like the hip thrust.
Yep, thrust it up and see how much easier it is.
Horizontal. This is terrible.
There you go. Yep. Even though it's an empty bar, you should have felt a big difference.
Yes.
Big difference.